Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly out of the modern world and into the narrow, uneven streets of a medieval town, where the air smells faintly of smoke, damp wood, and something herbal you can't quite place. You're lying in a simple bed, straw mattress gently poking through the linen, listening to church bells echo through the early morning mist. Somewhere nearby, a rooster is doing its best impression of an alarm clock you definitely didn't ask for.
You are not a knight, not a king, not even a humble farmer today. You are something far stranger. You are a medieval doctor, about to begin another long, uncertain day of trying to keep people alive with knowledge that is, let's say, a work in progress. And yes, you probably won't survive this career with your confidence intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to post your location and local time down in the comments. It's always strangely comforting to know where in the world people are drifting off to sleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.
You push yourself upright, joints stiff from yesterday's work, and immediately your mind starts running through what awaits you. Being a doctor in the medieval world isn't a neat, clean profession. There's no crisp white coat, no sterile hospital corridor humming with fluorescent lights. Instead, your life exists somewhere between scholar, craftsman, and slightly suspicious village eccentric. People respect you, mostly. They also fear you, occasionally.
And sometimes they blame you when things go wrong, which, statistically speaking, they often do.
Your training didn't begin in a university lecture hall the way it might centuries later. If you're lucky, you studied under a learned physician who could read Latin, the language of serious medicine. That alone already puts you in a tiny elite club. Most people around you can't read at all, and the fact that you can decipher ancient texts makes you seem almost magical. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval medicine leaned heavily on writings from ancient authorities like Galen and Hippocrates, whose ideas were treated as gospel for over 1,000 years. You don't question them much. After all, they're ancient, and ancient usually means obviously correct, right? As you swing your feet onto the cold floor, you mentally review what those books taught you. Health, you've learned, is all about balance. Not work-life balance, sadly, but the balance of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If someone is sick, it's because one of these fluids is out of whack. Simple, elegant, completely invisible. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors truly believed in humoral theory with blind faith, or whether many of them quietly noticed it didn't always work, but stuck with it anyway because, well, what else did they have? You pull on your woolen robe, already infused with the faint scent of dried herbs. It's not a fashion choice, it's a professional hazard. Your home and workplace are usually the same place, and somewhere nearby are jars of sage, rosemary, and maybe a suspiciously lumpy paste made from honey and crushed plants. One quirky tidbit from the period is that doctors sometimes carried pomanders, small balls filled with aromatic substances, believing good smells could protect them from disease. It's medieval air freshener with life or death implications. As you step outside, the town is slowly waking. Merchants are arranging goods, animals are being herded through streets far too narrow for modern comfort, and someone is already dumping yesterday's waste into the gutter. You carefully avoid it, mostly. Sanitation isn't your department, although you wish it were. Another light joke flickers through your tired mind. If washing hands saved lives, this place would be a ghost town by now. Sadly, hand washing isn't yet a widely accepted medical miracle. Your role today is already forming in the minds of the townspeople. To them, you are hope wrapped in uncertainty. When a child has a fever, when an old man coughs through the night,
When a noblewoman feels a strange pain she can't name, they send for you. You don't have diagnostic machines or lab tests. What you do have are your senses. You look, you listen, you smell. Sometimes, regrettably, you taste, because urine examination is considered a perfectly respectable diagnostic method. Yes, you will eventually stare thoughtfully at a flask of urine as if it holds the secrets of the universe. Sleep well knowing that. Your early life likely involved a long apprenticeship. You watched, you assisted, and you learned by doing, often on people who did not volunteer in any modern sense of the word. Medical knowledge spreads slowly, and mistakes are quietly folded into experience. One mainstream fact is that many medieval doctors never performed surgery themselves, leaving that messy business to barber surgeons. You, for now, focus on observation, advice, and remedies. It's less bloody and, frankly, better for your stress levels. There is a calm rhythm to your mornings. You review notes, if you keep them, written carefully on expensive parchment. You prepare simple remedies, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. The repetitive motion, almost meditative. This is where the bedtime part of your life settles in. The world moves slower here. There are no notifications, no urgent emails, just the steady understanding that someone, somewhere, is about to knock on your door with a problem you may or may not be able to fix. People assume you have answers. You know you don't always, and yet you show up anyway. That's the quiet weight of being a medieval doctor. You offer structure in a world that often feels chaotic. Even when your treatments fail, the act of caring, of explaining, of being present matters more than anyone openly admits. As the sun climbs higher, warming the stone walls and wooden beams around you, you take a slow breath. Another day begins. You adjust your robe, gather your tools, and step forward into a profession balanced delicately between ancient wisdom and hopeful guesswork. Remember this moment. Remember the bells, the herbs, the quiet confidence mixed with doubt. You'll need it later, when the limits of your knowledge become impossible to ignore. For now, though, everything is calm, and calm, in your line of work, is something to savor. You spend the quieter hours of the day with books, because before you can heal bodies, you're expected to memorize what long-dead minds thought about them. The room you settle into is dim, light slipping in through a narrow window and landing on thick, uneven pages. These books are precious, copied by hand, each one the result of months or years of patient labor. You treat them gently, partly out of respect, and partly because dropping one could cost more than your entire wardrobe. Knowledge here is heavy, literally. Your education leans hard on authority. Galen tells you how blood moves. Hippocrates explains disease as imbalance, and you nod along because everyone else has nodded along for centuries. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval medical education relied almost entirely on classical texts, often filtered through Arabic scholars, who preserved and expanded them during Europe's quieter centuries. You might not realize it, but your understanding of medicine is already global, stitched together from Greece, Rome, the Islamic world, and your own local traditions. Sometimes, not because you read it, not because it helps you understand, but because it makes the Latin feel more real. The words roll slowly off your tongue, and you pause often, translating them in your head. There's a rhythm to it, almost soothing, like chanting. It's not uncommon for doctors to believe that simply knowing the right words carries power. If you sound confident enough, people assume you are. It's an early lesson you learn well.
Much of what you study feels strangely abstract, Diseases are described in terms of qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, rather than causes you can point to. You imagine illness as weather happening inside the body. Too much heat, and the patient burns with fever. Too much cold, and they grow sluggish and pale. It makes a certain poetic sense, even if it doesn't always line up with what you see in front of you. Historians still argue whether this framework slowed medical progress or provided a useful structure that kept medicine alive at all during chaotic times.
Your teachers, if you had them, weren't encouraging originality. In fact, originality is mildly suspicious. If Galen didn't mention it, you probably shouldn't either. There's comfort in that. Responsibility spreads out across centuries. If a treatment fails, well, you followed the books. The books have survived longer than any patient. That feels like a safe bet.
You also learn through diagrams, crude sketches of the human body that look more symbolic than accurate. Organs float in places that feel more logical than real. Dissection is rare and controversial, often limited or forbidden depending on where you live. When it does happen, it's usually an animal, and you're expected to assume humans are close enough. One quirky tidbit is that some medieval doctors believed the liver had multiple chambers, mostly because it fit nicely with existing theories. Nobody wants to redraw the map if the old one feels tidy.
You turn a page carefully, the parchment whispering as it moves. There's a passage about bloodletting, when to do it, how much blood to remove, and which vein corresponds to which ailment. Timing matters. The phase of the moon matters. Your patient's age, temperament, and even the season all matter. It's medicine that feels like astrology with a knife. A small, tired smile crosses your face as you realize how many rules there are for something that still doesn't work reliably. That's light joke number 1 for the day, and it's mostly for your own sanity.
Despite the rigid structure, learning medicine isn't entirely dry. You hear stories passed from doctor to doctor, practical wisdom wrapped in anecdote. Someone once cured a fever with a certain herb. Someone else swears by honey and vinegar for wounds. You quietly file these away, even if they aren't in the official texts. Experience sneaks in through the cracks, no matter how tightly tradition tries to seal them. There's also the influence of religion, always present, gently watching over your shoulder. Healing ultimately comes from God, you're told. You are merely an instrument. This idea is comforting and convenient. If a patient recovers, you did well. If they don't, it was God's will. The burden of failure lightens just enough for you to sleep at night. Another light joke drifts through your thoughts. Divine malpractice insurance is remarkably comprehensive. Your education likely didn't follow a strict timeline. There is no graduation ceremony, no framed certificate on the wall. At some point, you simply begin practicing. You feel ready enough, or at least ready compared to everyone else. That's often how expertise works here. Relative confidence in a sea of uncertainty. As you read, you notice marginal notes scribbled by previous owners. Some agree with the text. Others politely argue with it. A few are just reminders, like, tried this, didn't help. These quiet rebellions fascinate you. They suggest that even in a world obsessed with authority, observation still matters. Historians still argue whether these marginal notes represent early scientific thinking or just practical frustration. But to you, they feel reassuringly human. Your mind grows pleasantly heavy as the hours pass. The combination of low light, dense text, and the gentle scratch of your finger following each line slows your breathing. You pause often, stretching your neck, listening to the distant sounds of the town. Somewhere, a cart rattles over stones. Somewhere else, someone coughs. You make a mental note. That cough may belong to your afternoon. By the time you close the book, you're filled with a strange mix of confidence and doubt. You know the theories. You can recite them. Whether they will help the next person who asks for you is another matter entirely. Still, this knowledge is your foundation. Without it, you're just a person with herbs and hope.
With it, you are officially a doctor. Learned, trusted, and occasionally right. You stand, stretching slowly, the room spinning just a little from too much reading and not enough fresh air. Tomorrow, you'll put these ideas into practice again. For now, they settle quietly in your mind, lining up like well-behaved thoughts, ready to be called upon when someone needs answers you can only half provide.
You move through your workspace slowly, almost ceremonially, because this room is the heart of your professional life. It isn't large. It doesn't need to be. The walls are lined with shelves, bowing slightly under the weight of jars, bowls, folded cloths, and objects whose purpose you absolutely know, even if they look suspicious to outsiders. Light slips in through a small window, catching dust motes that drift lazily in the air, as if even they are trying not to disturb you.
This space smells layered. There's the sharp bite of vinegar, the green dryness of crushed herbs, and something faintly animal underneath it all. It's not unpleasant once you're used to it. In fact, it's comforting. These smells mean preparation. They mean readiness. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval doctors often prepared their own remedies, blending herbs, resins, and minerals by hand, rather than relying on standardized medicines. Every doctor's workshop ends up slightly different, shaped by habit, region, and whatever ingredients are easiest to find. You check your tools first. Knives are cleaned, though clean is a relative term here. You wipe them with cloth and maybe a bit of wine, which feels official enough. There's a mortar and pestle, smooth from years of grinding, its surface worn into a shallow bowl that fits your palm perfectly. Using it is almost meditative. Grind, pause, grind again. Your shoulders relax with the rhythm, and for a moment, medicine feels less like responsibility and more like routine. Glass jars line one shelf, each holding something dried or preserved. Leaves, roots, seeds, powders in shades of green, brown, and yellow. You know which ones soothe a cough, which ones calm the stomach, and which ones are mostly there because somewhere, someone, swore they worked once. A quirky tidbit from the period is that some remedies included ingredients like powdered gemstones or animal parts, not because they had proven effects, but because rarity itself was thought to carry power. If it was hard to get, surely it must be good for you. It's an early example of luxury medicine, medieval style. You pause at a small jar sealed carefully with wax. Inside is something you don't use often, and you're quietly glad for that. Certain substances are powerful, or at least believed to be. You've learned through experience that using them sparingly is wise, not just for your patients, but for your reputation. People talk. If someone gets worse after seeing you, they remember exactly what you gave them.
Light joke number 1 drifts in. Side effects may include illness, death, and angry relatives. Your workspace also serves as a kind of display. Patients will see this room, and they'll judge you by it. A cluttered but purposeful arrangement suggests learning. Too neat, and they may think you don't actually work. Too chaotic, and they may worry you don't know what you're doing. It's a careful balance, like everything else. You've arranged things just so, even if you don't consciously admit it.
On a table sits a collection of flasks, some empty, some stained. These will soon hold urine, because diagnosis here is as visual as it gets. The color, clarity, and even foam of a sample are all considered meaningful. You don't question this too much. Everyone else seems convinced. Historians still argue whether uroscopy was a genuine diagnostic tool with occasional success, or mostly an elaborate performance that reassured patients through ritual. From your perspective, it's both. People like to see you thinking. You open a small chest and check your supply of bandages. Strips of cloth, clean enough, folded and stacked. These are for wounds, but also for show. A doctor who looks prepared inspires confidence. You remember reading that some physicians carried extra tools they rarely used, simply to appear more capable.
There's a lesson there that carries forward for centuries.
As you move around the room, your mind drifts back to the books you studied. The theories live here now, translated into physical form. The humors aren't just ideas, they're reflected in what you keep on hand. Cooling herbs for heat, warming spices for cold, drying agents for excess moisture. Your shelves are a three-dimensional version of everything you memorized. It's satisfying in a quiet way, like seeing thoughts turned into objects. The room is also where you wait. Between patients, time stretches. You sit on a low stool, listening to the sounds outside. Footsteps, voices, a distant argument that doesn't concern you. This waiting is part of the job. Illness doesn't follow a schedule, and neither do you. You learn patience here, surrounded by tools that promise action but demand restraint.
You glance at a small religious token tucked into the corner of the room. Many doctors keep one close. It's a reminder that your power has limits. Prayer and medicine coexist comfortably in your world. You might prepare a remedy and recommend a prayer in the same breath without seeing any contradiction. Another light joke slips through your thoughts. When in doubt, prescribe faith and hope, dosed daily. Occasionally, someone unfamiliar enters your workspace and looks unsettled. The smells, the tools, the quiet intensity, it's all a bit much. You've learned to soften your voice, to move slowly, to explain what you're doing in reassuring tones. This room can intimidate, but it can also calm. When someone believes they're being cared for, half the work is already done. As the day goes on, the light shifts. Shadows stretch across the floor. Dust settles. You tidy absent-mindedly, returning tools to their places, resetting the space for the next need. There's comfort in this repetition. No matter how unpredictable illness is, your response begins here, in this familiar room, with these familiar objects. You take a final look around, committing the scene to memory. The jars, the blades, the quiet hum of readiness. This workshop is more than a room. It's where knowledge meets belief, where theory becomes touch, and where you, medieval doctor that you are, prepared to face the next uncertain knock at the door. You don't rush into diagnosis. That's one of the first things you learn. Slow movements inspire confidence, and confidence is half your craft. When someone arrives at your door, pale or tired or anxious, you guide them into a chair with gentle gestures, as if the calm in your hands might travel into their body. Your voice stays low, even, unhurried. You ask simple questions, not too many. Where does it hurt? How long has it been happening? What were you doing before it started? The answers matter, but the way they're given matters too. Fear changes everything. Eventually, the ritual begins. A small flask is brought out, clear glass catching the light. This is uroscopy, urine diagnosis, and it is one of the most recognizable images of medieval medicine. A mainstream historical fact is that doctors across Europe regularly examined urine for color, clarity, sediment, and even smell, believing it revealed the inner balance of the body. To you, this feels normal, logical even. The body produces this fluid, so surely it must carry secrets. You lift the flask slowly, holding it up to the window. Light passes through it, turning the liquid into a glowing amber, pale yellow, cloudy white, or something more concerning. Each shade means something. Dark might suggest heat in the body. Pale might suggest cold. Cloudy could mean imbalance. Foam might mean agitation of the humors. You've memorized charts. You've read descriptions. You match what you see to what you know. The patient watches you closely. This part is important. They need to see you thinking. Your face remains calm, thoughtful, slightly serious. Inside, your mind runs through possibilities, but outwardly, you are certainty itself. A light joke drifts through your thoughts. If confidence were a medicine,
you'd be the most effective drug in the room.
After the flask comes the pulse. You take the patient's wrist gently, fingers resting on their skin. You feel for rhythm, strength, speed. The pulse is like a quiet language, and you've been taught to interpret it. A fast pulse suggests heat, a slow one suggests cold, an uneven one suggests imbalance. Historians still argue whether medieval pulse reading had any consistent medical accuracy, or whether it functioned more as a symbolic gesture of care and authority. To you, it feels like both. You do notice patterns. You also know that sometimes a pulse is just a pulse. You combine these observations with everything else you've seen: their posture, their eyes, their skin, the way they breathe. Diagnosis here isn't one test, it's a collage of impressions, a quiet accumulation of small details that forms a picture you trust enough to act on. There's a strange intimacy to this process. People allow you into their personal space in a way they allow almost no one else. They offer you their fluids, their hands, their fears. You carry this responsibility lightly on the outside and heavily on the inside. Even when you're wrong, you care about being wrong gently.
You sometimes remember your early training, how awkward these rituals felt at first. The first time you held a urine flask, you tried not to flinch. The first time you examined a pulse, you worried you were missing something obvious. Now, it's second nature. Your body knows the movements before your mind names them. There are quirks, too. Some doctors claim they can diagnose without seeing the patient at all, just by examining a flask brought by a servant. It's called remote diagnosis, and while it's respected in some circles, you're quietly skeptical. One quirky tidbit is that some medieval physicians became famous for this, turning uroscopy into a kind of performance art. People believed in it because they wanted to. It felt magical. It felt precise. It felt modern. You, however, prefer presence. You trust what you can see, hear, and feel. Even if the science is shaky, the human connection is real. As you move through this ritual again and again, patterns emerge. You start to recognize familiar combinations, certain coughs, certain fevers, certain weaknesses that seem to repeat across seasons. You don't call them diseases the way modern medicine will. You call them imbalances, disturbances, disruptions of harmony. Language shapes thought, and your language is all about balance. Sometimes diagnosis feels peaceful. Other times it feels like standing at the edge of a foggy river, trying to guess what's on the other side. You make decisions anyway. You always do. Doing nothing is also a choice, and not one people accept easily. You notice how much of this process is ritual. The slow lifting of the flask, the thoughtful silence, the gentle touch of the pulse, the quiet nod. Ritual calms people. It makes suffering feel structured. It tells them that their pain fits into a system, that it has a place and a name. That alone can ease fear, even before any remedy is given. Another light joke floats through your mind as you work. If looking thoughtful cured illness, you'd be running a miracle clinic. Sadly, it doesn't, but it helps. There are moments when you doubt yourself, when two signs contradict each other, when the urine suggests one thing and the pulse suggests another. This is where experience steps in. You choose the interpretation that feels safest, the least harmful, the most gentle. Medieval medicine, for all its limitations, often errs on the side of slow, cautious action. That restraint saves more people than anyone admits. As the day continues, you repeat this process again and again. Flask, light, pulse, observation, decision. Each time it feels slightly different, shaped by the person in front of you. No two diagnoses are exactly the same, even if the theory behind them is. By evening, your eyes are tired. Your fingers ache slightly from hours of pulse reading. Your mind feels full, heavy with small judgments and quiet worries.
You wash your hands, more out of habit than hygiene, and return the flasks to their shelf. You pause for a moment, alone in your workspace, surrounded by tools that promise clarity in a world full of uncertainty. Diagnosis, you realize, isn't about certainty at all. It's about interpretation, about doing your best with what you have, about standing calmly in the middle of not knowing and choosing a path anyway. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again.
Once you've decided what's wrong, or at least what seems wrong, the solution almost always leads you back to the same place: balance. Everything in your world circles this idea. Health is harmony. Illness is imbalance. Your job as a medieval doctor is not to fight disease, but to gently nudge the body back into alignment, like adjusting the strings of a tired instrument.
You picture the four humors the way you were taught. Blood is warm and wet, associated with cheerfulness and vitality. Phlegm is cold and wet, linked to calmness and sluggishness. Yellow bile is hot and dry, tied to anger and energy. Black bile is cold and dry, associated with melancholy. A mainstream historical fact is that this humoral system dominated European medicine well into the early modern period, shaping diagnoses and treatments for centuries.
It's the lens through which you see everything. So when a patient sits before you, pale and tired, you don't think in terms of viruses or deficiencies. You think, too much phlegm, too much cold. When someone is flushed, restless, burning with fever, you think, excess heat, perhaps an overabundance of blood or yellow bile. The logic feels consistent, even comforting. Every problem has a category. Every category has a response.
Treatment begins with advice, not action. You recommend rest because movement stirs the humors. You suggest changes in diet because food is medicine in its own quiet way. Warm foods for cold bodies, cooling foods for heat. Avoid certain meats, drink certain broths, eat lightly, eat slowly. This part of your job feels almost modern. Even centuries later, people will still be told to rest and eat carefully. You allow yourself a small, sleepy smile at that thought.
Light joke number 1. Sometimes the best medical advice really is have a nap and some soup. When advice isn't enough, you reach for intervention. Bloodletting is the most famous and the most feared. You don't use it casually. Despite what later centuries might assume, medieval doctors often approached it with caution. A mainstream historical fact is that bloodletting followed detailed rules, specific veins, specific times of year, even specific days of the week. You consult charts, consider the patient's age and strength, and weigh the risks carefully. You prepare the tools slowly, deliberately. The act itself is quiet, almost solemn. You explain what you are doing, because understanding reduces fear. The patient watches, trusting you in a way that feels heavier than the blade in your hand. You remind yourself that the goal is balance, not harm. Still, a light joke flickers through your mind to steady your nerves. If nothing else, you're very committed to the theory. Not all balancing requires blood. Sometimes you prescribe purging, encouraging the body to expel what doesn't belong. This might involve laxatives, emetics, or herbs with strong effects. These treatments are uncomfortable, but discomfort is often seen as proof that something is happening. Historians still argue whether these practices occasionally helped by stimulating the body or mostly weakened patients who needed strength. From your perspective, it depends. It always depends. There are gentler methods too. Baths, for example, carefully timed and prepared. Warm baths for stiffness and cold conditions. Cool washes for fevers. You pay attention to the seasons. Summer treatments differ from winter ones. The world outside the body matters just as much as what's inside it. Everything is connected. Your language reflects this worldview. You speak of excess and deficiency, of flow and stagnation. Patients understand this language intuitively. They live in a world governed by cycles, day and night, planting and harvest, feast and famine.
balance makes sense to them. It makes sense to you, too. Occasionally, someone challenges you. A patient who insists they feel worse after a treatment. A family member who questions your methods. You respond calmly, explaining that balance takes time, that the body resists change before it accepts it, that discomfort can be part of healing. Another light joke floats through your thoughts. If patience were contagious, you'd prescribe it by the spoonful.
There's also the matter of temperament. You're taught that people have natural humoral tendencies. Some are sanguine, cheerful, and energetic. Some are phlegmatic, calm and slow. Some are choleric, fiery and intense. Some are melancholic, thoughtful and withdrawn. Treatment adjusts not just the illness, but the person. This personalization feels advanced, even if the framework is flawed. You're not treating a disease in isolation. You're treating a whole human being as you understand them.
You notice patterns over time. Certain treatments seem to help certain people more than others. You quietly adjust, even if you don't write it down. Experience seeps into theory, blurring the edges. Historians still argue whether this slow, individual adaptation represented an early form of empirical medicine or simply pragmatic tradition. For you, it's survival. You do what seems to work, and you avoid what seems to harm.
By the end of the day, your mind feels full of balances calculated and recalculated. Heat reduced, cold warmed, excess drained, deficiency nourished. It's exhausting, but there's satisfaction in the effort. Even when outcomes are uncertain, the process feels purposeful.
As night approaches, you clean your tools and wash your hands, the motion slower now. You reflect on how much of your work is about restraint, knowing when to act and when to wait, knowing that sometimes the body finds its own balance if given the chance.
You sit quietly for a moment, letting the theory settle like sediment in still water. Tomorrow, you'll begin again, seeking harmony in bodies that rarely offer it easily. For now, though, the day is done, and balance, at least your own, can rest.
Most of your days are not filled with dramatic emergencies. They're filled with the slow, steady rhythm of ordinary illness. Coughs that linger through winter. Fevers that come and go like unwanted houseguests. Aches that settle into joints after long days in the fields. This is where you spend most of your time, quietly practicing medicine that is less about heroics and more about patience. When someone arrives complaining of a cough, you listen first. The sound matters. Dry or wet, shallow or deep. You notice how they breathe when they think no one is watching. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval doctors categorized illnesses largely by symptoms rather than causes, grouping conditions like coughs and fevers into broad patterns of imbalance. You don't need to know why the cough exists, you just need to know how it behaves. You recommend warmth for the chest, rest for the body, and gentle herbs to soothe irritation. Honey appears often in your remedies, mixed with herbs or warm water. It's one of the few ingredients that reliably seems to help, even if you don't know why. It coats, it calms, it reassures. You're not curing the cough, so much as giving the body space to quiet itself. Fevers are trickier. Heat suggests excess, and excess demands reduction. You encourage light foods, cool drinks, and rest in shaded rooms. You discourage heavy work. You might suggest sponging the body with cool water, careful not to shock it. Historians still argue whether these cooling methods occasionally helped by preventing dehydration, or whether they simply followed humoral logic without real effect. From your perspective, they often seem to help enough. You learn to watch the fever more than fight it. Does it rise at night? Does it come with chills? Does it leave the patient exhausted or strangely alert? These patterns guide you. You trust them because they're familiar, even if they're not precise. Aches and pains are constant companions in medieval life. Hard labor, poor footwear, and cold homes leave their mark. You treat these complaints gently. Warm compresses, oils rubbed into joints, rest when possible. You don't promise miracles, you promise comfort. Light joke number 1 drifts through your thoughts. If rest cured everything, half the village would still ignore your advice.
Stomach troubles are common too. Too much food, too little food, food eaten too quickly, food eaten at the wrong time. You advise moderation, a word that sounds wise and is conveniently vague. Herbal teas make frequent appearances here, calming the stomach and giving patients something to do besides worry. Children come to you often, carried by anxious parents. You soften your voice even more. Childhood illness is frightening because it feels unfair. You examine gently, prescribe lightly, and reassure constantly. Sometimes the reassurance is the treatment. You know this, even if you wouldn't say it out loud.
There are illnesses you quietly dread, lingering weakness, unexplained weight loss, fevers that don't break. You still treat them, of course, but your confidence becomes more careful. You manage expectations. You focus on comfort. Another light joke surfaces. You also notice how often people recover on their own. You prescribe rest and herbs, and days later they return improved. You nod, satisfied, even if part of you suspects time deserves most of the credit. Historians still argue whether medieval treatments had measurable impact on common illnesses, or whether recovery rates reflected the body's natural resilience. You don't dwell on it. Improvement is improvement. Your role extends beyond medicine. You're a listener. People talk while you work. They tell you about their worries, their fears, their sleepless nights. Illness is rarely just physical. You don't have language for mental health, but you recognize distress when you see it. You offer calm. You offer structure. You offer the sense that someone is paying attention. As evening approaches, you feel the cumulative weight of these small encounters. None are dramatic. All are meaningful. This is the quiet core of your profession, treating what is common, manageable, and human. You clean your workspace again, resetting jars and cloths, preparing for tomorrow's familiar complaints. The ordinary illnesses will return. They always do. And you will meet them with the same gentle methods, trusting that time, care, and a little honey will carry many people through. There are days when herbs and rest are not enough. You feel it before anyone says it out loud. The room grows quieter, movements slow. The patient's eyes stay fixed on you a little longer than usual. This is when medicine drifts towards surgery, and your calm, careful world sharpens at the edges. You don't rush these moments. Surgery, in your time, is never elegant and rarely gentle. A mainstream historical fact is that most medieval physicians avoided surgery whenever possible, leaving invasive procedures to barber surgeons who specialized in cutting, stitching, and setting bones. Still, there are situations where you cannot avoid it entirely. Abscesses swell, wounds fester, objects lodge where they shouldn't, and someone has to decide what to do next. You prepare the space differently now. Cloths are laid out. Tools are arranged within reach. You ask for light, more light than usual, because precision, limited as it may be, still matters. The air smells sharper, tinged with vinegar and metal. You wash your hands carefully, more from ritual than hygiene, but ritual has its own power. The patient is tense. Of course they are. Pain is expected, and fear walks in before the blade does. You speak slowly, explaining what will happen in simple terms. Understanding doesn't remove fear, but it gives it a shape. Light joke number 1 floats through your mind, unspoken. At least no one expects this to be painless. Expectations are refreshingly realistic. When the work begins, you focus completely. There's no room for distraction. Your movements are steady, practiced, learned through observation more than instruction. You know where to cut, and more importantly, where not to. Surgery here is less about exploration and more about restraint.
Do what must be done. Stop as soon as possible.
Pain management is limited. Alcohol, sometimes herbal mixtures, maybe a cloth to bite down on. You don't pretend it's enough. You just move efficiently. Historians still argue whether medieval surgical techniques were more effective than later generations assumed, pointing out that speed and decisiveness sometimes reduced complications. You don't think in those terms. You think in moments, in breaths, in keeping your hands from shaking. Some procedures are surprisingly routine. Lancing abscesses to release pressure, cleaning wounds, removing dead tissue. These acts, while uncomfortable, can genuinely help. You've seen people improve afterward, relief spreading across their faces despite the pain. Those moments stay with you. They make the harder days bearable. Other situations are more uncertain. Deep wounds, severe injuries. You assess quickly. Is intervention worth the risk? Will cutting help, or will it make things worse? You weigh your options in silence, knowing that whatever you choose will be remembered. Another light joke flickers through your thoughts, more weary than amused. Decision-making was never advertised as the hardest part of the job. You also rely on collaboration. Barber surgeons are not your rivals here. They are your allies. They bring practical skill, steady hands, and experience earned through repetition. You bring theory, diagnosis, and a sense of overall balance. Together, you form something like a team, even if professional boundaries are blurring. It's humbling, and you respect it. After the procedure, care continues. Bandaging, instructions, warnings, rest. You emphasize cleanliness as much as you understand it. Change cloths. Keep the area dry. Avoid strain. You don't promise outcomes. You promise attention. When things go well, the relief is quiet but deep. You watch healing begin, slow and uncertain, but real. When things don't go well, you carry that weight with you. Loss is never abstract. It has a face, a name, a family waiting outside. You clean your tools again, slower this time. The room feels heavier now. Surgery leaves marks, not just on bodies, but on you. You take a moment to breathe, grounding yourself in familiar motions. Resetting the space helps reset your mind. You know that tomorrow you'll return to coughs and fevers and ordinary complaints, and part of you is grateful for that. Surgery reminds you of the limits of your knowledge and the fragility of life. It humbles you in ways books never could. As the day fades, you sit quietly, hands resting in your lap. You've done what you could. In your world, that has to be enough. You move through your day with a growing awareness that you are not alone in the business of healing. As a medieval doctor, you share this crowded landscape with a peculiar professional cousin, the barber surgeon. You pass one on the street now, his shop marked by the familiar striped pole, red and white twisting together like a visual reminder of blood and bandages. You nod politely, because rivalry does not require open hostility. It lives comfortably in silence. In your world, medicine is not yet a single unified profession. Instead, it is a loose collection of overlapping roles. You, the learned physician, rely on books, theory, and reputation. The barber surgeon relies on hands, tools, and nerve. He cuts hair, shaves beards, pulls teeth, lances boils, and performs minor surgeries. You prescribe diets, observe urine, and recommend when blood should be let. Sometimes you supervise the bleeding. Sometimes he does it without you. This arrangement makes perfect sense to everyone, except perhaps modern people watching from the future while clutching their disinfectant wipes. You are trained at a university, or at least you like to say you are. You quote Galen with ease, drop Latin phrases into conversation, and carry yourself as someone who understands the invisible workings of the body. The barber surgeon, meanwhile, learns through apprenticeship. He watches, practices, and repeats. There are no grand lectures, only muscle memory and the steady confidence that comes from doing something hundreds of times. Historians still argue whether this practical experience made barber surgeons more effective healers in everyday cases than their academically trained counterparts. The tension between you is subtle but constant. You consider yourself above manual labor. Cutting into flesh feels dangerously close to butchery. Surgery, after all, is risky, painful, and frequently unsuccessful. When things go wrong, reputations suffer. Better to remain the calm thinker, the one who advises rather than acts. The barber surgeon, on the other hand, sees action as proof of value. People walk into his shop with problems they want solved now, not balanced slowly through diet and rest. He delivers results, or at least visible effort, which counts for a lot. You sometimes work together, whether you like it or not. A patient with an abscess comes to you first. You examine the swelling, consult the humors, and decide that excess bad blood must be released. You instruct the barber surgeon to perform the incision. He sharpens his blade, muttering something about how your instructions always arrive once the hard part is obvious. You pretend not to hear. Professional harmony, medieval style. There is a mainstream historical fact you live with every day. Surgery in the Middle Ages is considered a lower status craft, not an academic science. Universities teach medicine, not surgery. This division shapes how both of you are treated by society. You are invited into noble homes and paid in coin. The barber surgeon is paid in cash too, but also in favors, meals, and whatever happens to be on hand. Still, when someone is screaming in pain, status matters less than speed. That realization makes you quietly uncomfortable. A quirky detail drifts through your thoughts as you pass the barber's pole again. The red stripe represents blood, the white stripe bandages, and some say the pole itself recalls the stick patients gripped during bloodletting to make veins stand out. You imagine someone marketing this today as historic branding, and you almost smile. Almost. Medieval streets are not built for smiling at your own jokes too openly. Despite your rivalry, you share risks. If a patient dies, blame travels quickly. If the barber surgeon slips with his blade, people whisper about incompetence. If your prescribed regimen fails, people whisper about useless learning. The line between your roles is thin, and patients do not always respect it. They care less about theory and more about whether they can walk tomorrow. This shared vulnerability keeps your rivalry from turning into outright war.
You also share knowledge, though neither of you admits it proudly. You watch how he handles wounds, how he cleans them with wine or vinegar, and how quickly he works to minimize suffering. He listens when you speak about timing procedures according to astrological signs, even if he pretends it is only to humor you. Historians still argue whether astrology truly influenced surgical outcomes or merely provided psychological comfort to patients and practitioners alike.
There are moments when the boundary blurs completely. In times of crisis, plague scares, battlefield injuries, sudden outbreaks, you find yourself closer to the barber surgeon than ever. Theory steps aside. Survival takes the lead. You advise, he acts. You both hope. It is not elegant, but it is human. You are aware that some barber surgeons resent you deeply. They see you as sheltered, bookish, and disconnected from real suffering. You suspect they are not entirely wrong. At the same time, you resent their confidence, their willingness to cut without hesitation. You tell yourself it is recklessness. Late at night, you wonder if it is courage. This internal debate is not something you share aloud. Medieval masculinity has no space for quiet, professional self-doubt, especially not before bedtime. A light joke slips into your thoughts as you imagine a future where doctors and barbers are entirely separate professions. You picture someone walking into a barber shop, asking for a trim, and accidentally getting bled. You decide the future probably sorts that out. Probably. Over time, you notice small changes. Some barber surgeons begin to read more. Some physicians begin to observe more. The rigid boundary softens, just a little. Historians still argue whether this gradual blending laid the groundwork for modern surgery, or if it simply reflected practical necessity rather than intellectual progress. From where you stand, It feels like slow adaptation, the kind that happens without announcements or celebrations. As evening settles, you return to your own workspace, the smells of herbs and ink replacing the sharper scents of iron and blood. You reflect on the strange partnership you live with. Rivalry, cooperation, resentment, respect, all tangled together. You realize that your survival as a medieval doctor depends not just on what you know, but on how well you navigate these professional relationships. You settle onto a bench, stretching your tired hands, grateful that today did not require you to hold a blade. Somewhere nearby, a barber surgeon finishes his last shave of the day, sweeping hair from the floor. Two paths, side by side, neither quite complete without the other. You breathe out slowly, letting that thought drift, and prepare to move on with the night. As your reputation settles into something solid, you begin to feel the quiet pressure of expectation. People no longer come only when they are desperate. They come because they believe you know things. This belief is both flattering and exhausting. Knowledge, in your world, is a careful performance, one you must repeat day after day, without visible cracks. Your workspace reflects this balancing act. Shelves hold jars of dried plants, labeled in careful handwriting. Scrolls and notebooks sit nearby, their margins crowded with personal notes, half-remembered lectures, and reminders to yourself about what seemed to work last time. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval physicians relied heavily on classical texts, especially Galen and Hippocrates, often copying and commenting on them, rather than questioning their foundations. You do the same, though you rarely admit how often lived experience quietly reshapes your confidence in those old authorities.
Patients watch you closely now. They study your face as you examine them, reading meaning into every pause. A raised eyebrow can spark hope or fear. You learn to control your expressions, to look thoughtful without looking uncertain. This is medicine as theater, and you are both actor and audience. Light joke number 1 drifts through your mind. If only you could bill extra for facial composure.
Diagnosis is your daily puzzle. Without modern tools, you rely on observation, touch, smell, and especially urine. Urinalysis is not a joke here. It is central to your practice. You lift glass flasks toward the light, examining color, clarity, sediment. Is it pale and watery, suggesting excess phlegm? Dark and thick, pointing to overheated blood? Patients sometimes look embarrassed, but you treat it with solemn seriousness. Historians still argue whether medieval urine charts were genuinely diagnostic or primarily symbolic. But to you, they offer structure in a world full of unknowns. You also ask questions. How long has the pain lasted? What did they eat yesterday? Do they sleep well? Have they traveled? You listen more than you speak, because stories often reveal more than symptoms. A cough after a long journey means something different than a cough after a damp winter indoors. This kind of reasoning feels quietly modern, even if you'd never use that word. Still, theory guides you. The 4 humors remain your mental map: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Balance equals health. Imbalance equals illness. It is elegant in its simplicity and comforting in its certainty. You know exactly what you're supposed to do when one humor dominates. Adjust the diet, recommend rest or activity, apply heat or cold, sometimes bleed. You follow this framework not because it is perfect, but because it gives you something to hold on to when outcomes are unpredictable. A quirky tidbit floats through your awareness as you recall a lecture about how emotions influence humors. Too much sadness breeds black bile. Excess anger heats the blood. Love, inconveniently, affects everything. You try not to laugh when prescribing calm routines for emotional imbalance. Light joke number 2, if only feelings were as easy to balance as food portions. You are aware that some treatments help, despite the theory behind them. Clean wounds heal better. Fresh air improves breathing. Rest restores strength.
These truths exist alongside bloodletting and purging, creating a strange mixture of insight and tradition. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine succeeded because of its theories or in spite of them. From where you stand, it feels like stumbling forward with occasional lucky steps. Reputation travels faster than you expect. A successful treatment earns praise in the market. A failure earns whispers. You cannot control either, so you focus on consistency. Be calm, be attentive, be available. People forgive uncertainty more easily when they feel seen. This is not written in any medical text, but you learn it quickly. You also feel the weight of self-doubt. Late at night, you replay decisions. Should you have waited longer? Should you have acted sooner? Did you miss a sign? There is no easy way to answer these questions, and no one expects you to voice them. A medieval doctor is supposed to be confident, composed, and quietly authoritative. Anxiety stays internal, folded neatly behind your ribs. Occasionally, you encounter another physician. Conversation is polite but cautious. You compare notes without revealing too much. Each of you guards your methods, aware that professional competition is real. Yet you also crave understanding. Someone else who knows how heavy responsibility feels. Someone who has stared into a urine flask at dawn and wondered if it truly held answers. As evening approaches, your pace slows. Fewer visitors come now, and the light softens. You tidy your space, rearranging jars, straightening parchment. These small rituals ground you. They remind you that while outcomes are uncertain, process is not. You can always prepare, observe, and respond with care. Light joke number 3 slips in as you realize how much time you spend thinking about balance. You imagine a future where people talk about work-life balance instead of humoral balance. You suspect the problem never really changes, just the language. You sit quietly for a moment, listening to distant sounds of the street. You feel tired, but steady. Diagnosis is never perfect, but it is yours. You've learned to read bodies as best you can, to blend old wisdom with lived experience. Tomorrow will bring new puzzles, new expectations, and new chances to get it almost right. For now, you breathe, letting the day settle. You are doing what medieval doctors do best, observing, adjusting, and hoping that balance, in whatever form it takes, will hold through the night. By mid-morning, your work takes on a quieter rhythm. The early rush of patients has slowed, leaving space for reflection and careful attention. You wander between your shelves, examining the jars of herbs and powders that form the foundation of your treatments. Each container holds a promise: sage for digestion, rosemary for circulation, chamomile to soothe agitation. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval doctors relied extensively on herbal remedies, often combining them into complex recipes, sometimes with dozens of ingredients, each thought to target a specific humor or symptom. You have memorized many combinations, though practice has taught you that the simplest treatments often work best. Your fingers brush the labels, worn from decades of handling, and you recall the origins of some of these plants. Some were grown locally in gardens or collected from nearby woods. Others traveled long distances along trade routes, arriving in strange sacks from distant lands. You marvel quietly at the reach of the world beyond your town. Knowledge and material have traveled across continents to reach your hands. It is a comforting thought. Medicine is old, yet global. You prepare a tincture for a patient with persistent cough. The process is deliberate. Crush leaves, measure powder, mix with a small amount of wine or vinegar. The mortar and pestle hum under your rhythm, a kind of mechanical meditation. You notice the scent, strong, slightly pungent, earthy, and allow yourself a small, private smile. There's a tactile satisfaction in transforming raw materials into something potentially helpful. Light joke number 1. If only satisfaction alone could cure ailments,
your work would be miraculous. As you work, you consider the patient you saw yesterday with a stubborn fever. You think back to the details, the way the pulse throbbed beneath your fingers, the color of the urine under the morning sun, the patient's anxious breathing. You recall the advice you gave: cooling foods, gentle baths, a treatment as any herb. Historians still argue whether the combination of herbal remedies and rest genuinely helped recovery, or whether the body simply healed itself. But in your practice, the distinction is less important than results. You lift a small flask containing a mixture of dried flowers and roots, considering its application. Sometimes the choice of remedy is guided by theory, sometimes by observation, and sometimes by intuition, a quiet sense honed by countless repeated encounters. You know that no text can fully prepare you for the individuality of each patient. One person may find relief with a mild herbal infusion. Another may need a slightly stronger preparation. The variability keeps you alert, even when the procedures themselves are familiar. Your mind drifts to nutrition, another essential component of care. You consider the foods commonly available: grains, vegetables, occasional meat, and dairy. Recommendations for diet are based on humoral theory: warm foods for cold humors, cooling foods for heat, but also on what is practical and affordable. You note that even simple dietary guidance can stabilize a patient's condition. This attention to daily life, rather than dramatic interventions, defines much of your practice. Midday brings another visitor, a woman carrying her child, pale and listless. You kneel to examine the child, noting the pulse, skin color, and general demeanor. Observation dominates your approach. You speak softly, gently, so the child's fear does not add to the illness. You prescribe a mild herbal decoction, advise careful feeding, and emphasize rest. You notice relief on the mother's face, even before any cure takes effect. Sometimes reassurance is treatment itself. Between patients, you make small notes in the margins of your notebooks, adding observations, quantities, and effects. These annotations are your private record, a supplement to the authoritative texts you rely on. One quirky tidbit from your practice is that these handwritten marginalia often contain practical wisdom not found in the official writings: a plant that works better in one season than another, a patient response that contradicts theory. You preserve these details for yourself, understanding that knowledge evolves quietly, one observation at a time. The afternoon stretches, and your work becomes a mix of hands-on treatment and reflection. You consider how theory and practice intersect. Humoral theory offers a framework, but your experience teaches nuance. For instance, not all fevers respond as expected, and not all coughs indicate the same imbalance. Each case challenges your assumptions. Historians still debate whether medieval practitioners engaged in proto-scientific observation or merely followed ritualized routines. From your perspective, you do both, balancing tradition with attentive perception. You pause at a window, noticing the sunlight shifting across the room. Dust motes drift lazily in the beam, and the familiar scents of herbs and dried plants fill your senses. There is a gentle calm in these moments, a reminder that your work is not only about intervention, but also about creating a space of care and observation. Patients sense it too. They respond to the environment, the rhythm, and your measured attention. This awareness becomes as integral to healing as any treatment. As evening approaches, you review your preparations for the next day. Tinctures, powders, bandages, and notes are organized methodically. This ritual of readiness gives you a sense of control in an otherwise unpredictable practice. Another light joke surfaces quietly in your thoughts. If preparation were a cure, you would be unbeatable. You end the day with a slow breath, reflecting on the ordinary yet essential nature of your work. Healing is rarely dramatic. It is measured, patient, and above all, persistent. You have guided bodies toward balance,
observed responses, and adjusted approaches. Tomorrow, the rhythm will resume, predictable yet full of small challenges, each met with careful attention. The rhythm of your practice deepens as the weeks pass. You begin to recognize familiar faces and recall details of their conditions without needing to check notes. A young boy who suffers from chronic cough returns regularly, his mother carrying him carefully on her hip. You watch his chest rise and fall, feel the subtle warmth of his skin, and remember the tincture that seemed to soothe him last time. This continuity allows your work to evolve. Treatments are not isolated events, but part of an ongoing conversation with the body. Observation dominates your approach. You notice subtle changes, slightly less pallor, a more lively glance, the easing of tension in muscles. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval physicians emphasized repeated observation to monitor progress, adjusting treatments based on incremental changes rather than expecting immediate cures. You find this method comforting because it allows you to witness small victories and learn from each case. Herbs continue to play a central role in your interventions. You prepare poultices, infusions, and powders, combining ingredients thoughtfully. Some are standard, others tailored for specific patients. The scent of crushed leaves fills the room, mingling with the faint sharpness of vinegar used to cleanse tools and surfaces. You take pleasure in the tactile aspect of preparation, grinding, mixing, folding cloths, as much as in the medical purpose. Light joke number 1. Sometimes it feels like you're running a perfume shop rather than a clinic. Children remain both challenging and rewarding. Their reactions are unpredictable. They squirm during examinations, complain about smells, and test your patience. Yet they also respond in ways adults rarely do. A child calms with gentle words, a reassuring touch, or a sweetened herb-infused syrup. You adapt your techniques, balancing theory with intuition. Humor helps. A quiet, unspoken joke in your mind. If laughter could cure, you'd never need a mortar and pestle, is sometimes enough to ease tension. Dietary guidance continues to occupy a large part of your advice. Patients frequently ask for specifics. Should I eat bread or meat? Boiled or roasted? You answer carefully, blending humoral theory with practicality. Warm, moist foods for cold humors, cooling, light foods for heat. Portion size matters, as does timing. You sometimes note that the simplest changes, adding more vegetables, reducing heavy meats, yield surprising improvements. Historians still debate whether such guidance genuinely impacted health or simply offered a sense of agency and structure to the patient. To you, the distinction is minor. Any positive effect is worth the effort. You begin to notice patterns over time. Certain ailments peak in particular seasons. Coughs and fevers in winter, stomach issues in summer, joint pains after rainy spells. This seasonal awareness guides your preemptive advice. You prepare patients for the rhythms of their bodies and environment, emphasizing prevention as much as treatment. It is slow, methodical, and deeply satisfying when it works. Light joke number 2. Predicting illness in advance makes you feel a little like a weather forecaster with a mortifyingly tiny success rate. Your collaboration with barber surgeons continues to shape your practice. You rarely perform surgery yourself, but your guidance ensures that interventions align with humoral theory and observed symptoms. You discuss cases carefully, weighing the risks of incisions, bloodletting, or purgatives. The barber surgeon appreciates your perspective, even if he grumbles about theory slowing him down. Quirky tidbit: some barbers maintain elaborate charts of vein locations and bleeding times, almost like medieval spreadsheets, though they often ignore them if speed demands it. There are moments when outcomes surprise you. A patient expected to decline gradually improves instead, or a mild intervention works better than anticipated. These moments reinforce your sense of humility. Despite all your learning, the body retains autonomy. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval treatments were efficacious versus coincidental recovery. But for you, the visible relief on a patient's face is enough evidence to continue. You also deal with uncertainty constantly.
Symptoms sometimes conflict. Urine suggests one imbalance, while pulse indicates another. You weigh evidence carefully, choosing treatments that are cautious rather than extreme. You learn over time that restraint is often more effective than action, and that overzealous interventions can harm more than they heal. Light joke number 3. If indecision were a treatment, you'd be the most successful doctor in the city. As evening falls, you tidy your workspace. Mortar and pestle cleaned, powders sealed, cloths folded. The room feels restored, a sanctuary of calm in a bustling world. You take a moment to breathe, listening to the distant murmur of the street, the faint scrape of a cart, the occasional laughter of children heading home. This gentle background is part of the rhythm, part of the environment that allows both you and your patients to feel steadier.
Sitting quietly, you reflect on the subtle artistry of your work. Healing is rarely dramatic. It is a continuous practice of observation, intervention, and patience. Your reputation grows, built not on spectacular cures, but on consistent care, attentiveness, and quiet competence. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but the lessons of today, the careful observation, the gentle touch, the nuanced understanding of humors, remain.
You are reminded that medicine is as much about the body as it is about the patience, empathy, and quiet attention you bring to it. As winter deepens, your work shifts subtly to accommodate the season. Patients arrive with stiff joints, lingering colds, and fevers that seem to linger longer in the chilled air. You notice how the cold seeps into muscles, slows the pulse, and aggravates underlying humoral imbalances. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval physicians adjusted treatments based on the season, believing that external climate affected the body's internal balance. For you, it's an intuitive process, watching how the environment interacts with the body and anticipating how daily routines must adapt. Your mornings began with a careful inspection of your herbal supplies. Some roots have lost potency in the damp, some dried leaves are brittle. You reorganize jars and check tinctures, knowing that preparation now will save time and frustration when patients arrive. You crush and mix herbs methodically. Thyme for respiratory relief, sage to warm the body, chamomile to calm agitation. There's a quiet rhythm in this work, almost meditative, grounding you before the day begins. Light joke number 1 drifts through your mind. If grinding herbs were an Olympic sport, you'd probably take gold, or at least a respectable 3rd place. The first patient of the day is a woman with a lingering cough. You observe her posture, listen carefully as she breathes, and examine her pulse. Her urine is collected in a small flask, and you study it in the morning light. Pale and thin, you think, perhaps cold and phlegmatic. The theory guides you, but experience tempers your judgment. You recommend warmth, a diet rich in gentle foods, and a daily infusion of thyme and honey. The combination is not dramatic, but you know it will likely improve comfort over time. Historians still argue whether these remedies genuinely altered outcomes or merely offered patients a sense of control and care. You, however, see the subtle improvements, the small easing of tension, and consider that evidence enough. Children inevitably require particular attention. A small boy arrives, his mother carrying him gingerly. He coughs weakly, eyes watery. You kneel to meet his gaze, speaking softly to calm him. You crush herbs into a warm decoction, watching as he sips slowly. Sometimes the act of administering medicine becomes a ritual, easing fear and encouraging cooperation. The tactile experience, the warmth of the cup, the sweet taste of honey, the subtle aroma of herbs, can be as therapeutic as the remedy itself. You smile inwardly, a light joke forming. If only comfort alone were considered a cure, you'd be unstoppable. Your afternoons are often spent attending to the more persistent and chronic cases. A man with joint pain moves cautiously into your room. You examine stiffness, Flex each limb gently and consider heat applications. Warm compresses and light oils are recommended, sometimes combined with gentle movement exercises to maintain flexibility. Observation is key. You note changes over time, subtle differences that might indicate progress or decline. The slow accumulation of these details allows you to adjust treatments thoughtfully. Quirky tidbit: some patients believe that chanting certain prayers while applying compresses improves their efficacy. You do not argue. Psychology, after all, is part of healing. You also pay attention to diet, particularly in winter, when cold humors dominate. Heavy, warming foods like stews and root vegetables are encouraged, along with spices that stimulate circulation. You advise moderation, balancing nourishments with the avoidance of overindulgence. The connection between food, season, and humoral balance dominates much of your advice, creating a steady, predictable framework for patient care. Light joke number 2. You sometimes think of yourself as a nutritionist in disguise, though without the modern conveniences of recipes or calculators. Evening brings a quieter pace. Patients have returned home, and the hum of the street outside softens. You tidy your tools, wash cloths, and check notes for the day. Each observation, each small detail is logged mentally or on parchment, creating a living record of your patients and your responses. Some of these notes will inform future treatments, while others will remain private reflections. Experience accumulates quietly, without fanfare, strengthening your judgment incrementally. You reflect on the broader rhythm of your profession. Surgery and invasive interventions are rare. Most of your work is preventive or supportive. This slower pace allows careful observation, detailed record-keeping, and nuanced adjustments. You notice patterns in health and illness that extend beyond individual patients, seasonal influences, environmental factors, and the impact of diet and lifestyle. Historians still argue whether this attentiveness constituted thinking or was simply practical experience, but for you, it is a natural outcome of careful, repeated engagement with the human body. By nightfall, the room is quiet, suffused with the lingering scent of dried herbs. You prepare tinctures for tomorrow, ensuring that each mixture is ready, each jar labeled. There is satisfaction in these small preparations, a sense of order and control in a world where the results of your interventions are never guaranteed. Like joke number 3, if careful preparation were an elixir, you would be a master apothecary indeed. As you sit back, breathing in the faint, earthy aroma of your workspace, you recognize the subtle artistry of your practice. Healing is not spectacle. It is a continuous, attentive process. You guide bodies toward balance, observe subtle shifts, adjust treatments, and provide reassurance. The day has been full, yet measured, filled with small victories, patient learning, and the quiet satisfaction of doing your work well. The late winter days carry a certain stillness that shapes your work. Streets are quieter, the air sharper, and patients often move more slowly, their movements constrained by chill or lingering illness. You notice how bodies respond to the environment, the subtle interplay of temperature, dampness, and physical activity. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval physicians considered climate and season a major factor in diagnosis and treatment, adjusting therapies according to the weather, prevailing winds, and even the lunar cycle. You observe these patterns with care, knowing that even small changes can affect recovery. Your morning begins with familiar rituals, inspecting herbs, checking tinctures, and reviewing notes from yesterday. Some herbs have lost potency in the cold, requiring careful adjustment in quantity. You crush leaves and roots with measured rhythm, the familiar tactile sensation grounding you for the day ahead. Light joke number 1 floats in your mind. If grinding herbs were a competitive sport, you'd be undefeated. The aroma of crushed thyme, rosemary, and sage mingles with faint traces of vinegar from tool cleaning, creating a comforting olfactory backdrop that reminds you why these routines are so soothing.
Patients arrive steadily, each bringing unique challenges. A woman with joint stiffness greets you with a polite nod. You examine her carefully, noting temperature, tenderness, and movement range. Warm poultices and gentle oils are applied, often accompanied by mild exercises to prevent stiffness from worsening. Observing subtle shifts over days and weeks allows you to adjust treatment gradually, a delicate process guided by experience as much as theory. Historians still argue whether these practices were effective beyond placebo or conditioning, but you see tangible results in improved mobility and reduced discomfort. Children require special attention. A small boy, pale from lingering winter colds, is carried in by his mother. You kneel to his level, speaking softly, reassuring him with gentle words and careful gestures. He drinks a decoction of honey and herbs, each sip administered with patience and care. The sensory experience, the warmth, the smell, the taste, provides comfort, even if the curative effect is subtle.
Light joke number 2. If patience alone were a remedy, your success rate would be astonishing.
Diet continues to play a central role in care. You advise seasonal adjustments, warming foods like roasted root vegetables, light meats, and spiced broths to counter cold humors. You counsel moderation, emphasizing balance rather than extremes. Small changes, more vegetables, lighter meals, better hydration, often yield remarkable improvements in patient vitality.
Quirky tidbit. Some patients swear that consuming certain herbs at precise hours enhances their efficacy, a practice blending folk wisdom with your professional guidance. You neither endorse nor dismiss it, acknowledging that belief itself can be a subtle healer. You also pay careful attention to mental and emotional states. Mood and temperament are considered part of humoral balance, influencing both illness and recovery. You notice signs of worry, fatigue, or melancholy, and offer calming words, structured routines, and reassurance. Historians still argue whether medieval attention to emotional health was truly therapeutic or symbolic, but you recognize that these small gestures often improve patient cooperation. Collaboration with barber surgeons continues, though your interventions remain distinct. When surgical assistance is needed, you provide guidance according to theory and observation, while the barber surgeon executes procedures with steady hands. You monitor the patient, ensuring that aftercare supports recovery and aligns with humoral principles. This cooperative dynamic blends theory with practice, intellect with manual skill. Light joke number 3, it sometimes feels as though you're conducting an orchestra, only the instruments are blades and herbs.
Midday brings reflection. You review the slow progression of illnesses, the small successes and setbacks. Observation, patience, and repetition are your primary tools. Each day adds layers of understanding about how bodies respond to environment, diet, herbs, and treatment. You recognize patterns, subtle rhythms, and deviations, storing them in memory or note for future reference. Experience quietly accumulates, guiding future decisions in ways books cannot.
As afternoon light fades, you prepare tinctures and poultices for tomorrow. Jars are checked, powders measured, tools cleaned. Each preparation carries a sense of ritual, grounding you in process, even when outcomes remain uncertain. The act itself becomes part of care, a steady, deliberate rhythm that soothes both practitioner and patient. You breathe in the familiar sense of herbs and vinegar, letting them anchor your attention.
Evening arrives, and with it a pause. Streets are quieter, and the soft glow of lamps illuminates your workspace. You reflect on the subtle artistry of your craft. Healing is a continuous, attentive process. Observation, intervention, and reassurance weave together in a steady practice. The day has been full but measured, filled with small victories, patient learning, and the quiet satisfaction of consistent care. You sit back, hands resting, eyes closing briefly. Outside, the wind rustles, snow drifts in shadows, and distant footsteps echo faintly.
You feel the weight of responsibility, but also the reward of steady diligence. Tomorrow will bring new patients, new challenges, and new opportunities to apply the balance, patience, and careful observation you have honed. The rhythm continues, gentle, predictable, and profoundly human. Spring approaches slowly, and with it, subtle changes in the rhythms of your practice. The air warms, sunlight stretches across the room, and patients arrive with complaints shifted by the season. Fevers more frequent, digestive issues aggravated by new foods, and joint pains relieved slightly by milder weather. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval physicians carefully considered seasonal variation in their treatments, believing the body's humors responded to environmental changes, with winter tending to cold and wet imbalances and spring stimulating warmth and activity. You feel this seasonal rhythm in your bones as well as your patients. Even your own steps through the clinic seem lighter. Your mornings begin with the familiar ritual of inspecting herbs and preparing remedies. Some roots that endured the winter cold are now sprouting slightly, reminding you that life persists quietly even in harsh conditions. You crush leaves, mix powders, and create decoctions in precise proportions. Each preparation is both an act of care and a meditation. Light joke number 1 drifts through your mind. If patience were a herb, you'd already be completely cured. The familiar scents, earthy, pungent, sweet, fill the room, grounding you before the day unfolds. Patients arrive steadily. A farmer, sunburned from working early spring fields, complains of fatigue and digestive discomfort. You observe his eyes, pulse, and posture, noting signs of heat and imbalance. You recommend light, cooling foods, small portions, and increased hydration. Herbs like mint and chamomile are used to soothe the digestive system. You remind him to rest after strenuous labor. Historians still debate whether medieval dietary guidance effectively treated seasonal ailments or simply provided reassurance, but you notice subtle improvements in those who follow your advice. Children continue to require special care. A small girl arrives, listless and pale, having struggled with lingering winter colds. You kneel beside her, speak softly, and prepare a gentle infusion of honey and herbs. The warmth of the liquid, the comforting aroma, and the slow, careful administration all contribute to her easing discomfort. You notice her mother relaxing, trust building through the small rituals of care. Light joke number 2. If calmness alone cured illness, you'd be a legend in every village by now. You also attend to lingering chronic cases. A man with arthritis enters, joints stiff from the long winter. You apply warm oils and poultices, encouraging gentle stretching exercises. You observe his response over days and weeks, adjusting applications according to subtle changes. These slow improvements, joint mobility regained, pain reduced, reinforce the value of patience and observation. Quirky tidbit: some patients insist that mild music or chanting while applying treatments improves efficacy, an early nod to the psychological component of care. Your collaboration with barber surgeons remains steady but nuanced. They continue to perform minor surgical tasks, while you provide guidance based on humoral theory and careful observation. You monitor the results, ensuring post-procedure care aligns with the principles of balance. It is a delicate dance of theory and practice, intellect and manual skill, one that has evolved over months of quiet cooperation. Like joke number 3. If coordination alone cured illness, you'd be famous as a conductor of blades and herbs. Midday is often devoted to reflection and preparation. You review notes, update observations, and consider adjustments to treatments for recurring patients. Patterns emerge. Fevers more common as warmth returns, digestive complaints tied to seasonal changes in diet, and minor injuries increasing as people return to outdoor labor. These patterns inform both preventative advice and therapeutic decisions. Experience guides you as much as theory. No amount of reading can replace the careful attention gained from repeated observation. In the late afternoon, you prepare tinctures and poultices for the next day.
Each ingredient is measured, each jar labeled. Tools are cleaned and laid out in order, ready for use. The act of preparation is as much a ritual as it is a practical necessity, providing a sense of calm and readiness for whatever tomorrow brings. The faint scent of herbs, the sound of grinding, and the methodical motions create a quiet, meditative atmosphere that steadies both mind and body.
As evening falls, the streets quiet, and the sun casts long shadows across your workspace. You take a moment to sit and reflect. Healing, you realize, is a slow, continuous process. Observation, gentle intervention, and reassurance form the core of your practice. Dramatic cures are rare. Steady, consistent care produces the most meaningful results. Patients trust you, not because you wield miraculous power, but because you offer consistency, attention, and patience. You breathe in the aroma of herbs, feeling the weight of the day settle into your muscles. Tomorrow will bring new patients, new challenges, and new opportunities to apply what you have learned. Your practice is not glamorous, but it is vital. Each careful observation, each gentle treatment, and each patient eased is a victory. The rhythms of the body, the seasons, and your work are intertwined, forming a steady cadence that guides you through both success and uncertainty. You close your eyes briefly, letting the day's work fade, feeling the subtle satisfaction that comes from continuous, mindful effort. Spring is arriving, and with it, a sense of renewal for you, for your patients, and for the work that sustains both. Summer arrives fully, carrying warmth, long days, and a slow, gentle shift in the nature of your work. The streets are busier, children play in the sun, and laborers return from fields with scrapes, bites, and occasional fevers brought on by heat and overexertion. You notice how bodies respond differently to this season. Humors are affected by warmth, dehydration is more common, and minor illnesses appear in new patterns. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval physicians adjusted treatments according to seasonal influences, emphasizing cooling foods, gentle herbs, and moderate activity in summer months. For you, this adaptation is intuitive, learned through years of observing human responses to heat, movement, and the rhythms of daily life. Your morning begins with inspection of your herbal supplies, many of which flourish with the longer days. Calendula, mint, and elderflower are now at their peak, and you prepare tinctures, infusions, and poultices with these fresh ingredients. You crush leaves and flowers carefully, inhaling the sharp, sweet scent, letting the rhythm of preparation ground your thoughts. Light joke number 1. If only mixing herbs counted as a sport, you'd be undefeated in medieval Olympics. There's a subtle comfort in these routines, a quiet meditation that stabilizes your day before patients arrive. Patients come steadily. A farmer complains of heat exhaustion and fatigue after working long hours in the sun. You examine his pulse, note pallor and sweating, and recommend cooling foods, plenty of water, and rest in the shade. Herbs like mint and chamomile are used to calm digestion and nervous tension. Observing subtle shifts, more alert eyes, improved color, steadier breathing, guides your follow-up care. Historians still argue whether medieval summer remedies genuinely improved outcomes or primarily offered psychological comfort, but you notice small, tangible improvements that matter more than theory. Children inevitably are both lively and vulnerable. A small boy with mild sunstroke arrives, fanning himself lazily, too weak to play. You kneel beside him, speaking gently and preparing a cool infusion with calming herbs. He sips slowly, eyes widening at the faintly sweet aroma, and you notice relief spreading across both his and his mother's faces. Light joke number 2. If patients alone could heal, you'd be known across kingdoms for miraculous success. The sensory experience, the taste, warmth, and scent of your remedies reinforces healing in ways subtle but meaningful.
You also continue to monitor chronic conditions. Joint pain from previous winters improves gradually with the warmer weather, yet you still apply gentle oils and encourage light exercise. Observation remains paramount. Small changes guide adjustments in treatment. Quirky tidbit. Some patients believe that singing or gentle music while applying treatments enhances efficacy, and though you do not enforce it, allowing these rituals adds comfort and cooperation. Healing is as much about reassurance and routine as it is about herbs or poultices. Collaboration with barber surgeons persists when invasive procedures are required. You guide them with theory and observation, while they execute minor surgical interventions, ensuring that post-procedure care aligns with humoral principles. It is a delicate balance of intellect, skill, and trust. Light joke number 3. Coordinating procedures feels at times like conducting an orchestra, only the instruments are blades and herbal mixtures. Yet the results, when care and observation combine. Midday is devoted to reflection and preparation. You review notes, record outcomes, and adjust future treatments. Patterns emerge clearly now. Fevers spike in midsummer, minor digestive issues occur with seasonal changes in diet, and minor injuries from outdoor labor are more frequent. Experience and attentive observation guide you as much as theory. No text can replicate the knowledge accumulated from repeated encounters. Historians still debate whether medieval medicine was empirical or ritualistic, but for you, it is both, a blend of careful observation, cautious intervention, and enduring patience. As afternoon stretches into evening, you prepare tinctures, poultices, and powdered herbs for the next day. Tools are cleaned and arranged meticulously. The room carries the familiar, comforting scent of herbs, the sound of grinding leaves, and the quiet order of preparation. This ritual grounds you, providing calm and continuity in a world of uncertainty. You feel the weight of responsibility lightly, balanced by confidence in your practiced methods and accumulated knowledge.
By nightfall, the streets outside are quiet. The long summer day has left a gentle heat in the air, and distant sounds of children, animals, and laborers fade gradually. You sit for a moment, reflecting on the work of the day, the week, and the season. Healing, you realize, is not the result of dramatic interventions, but of consistent, thoughtful attention. Observing, adjusting, advising, and reassuring. Every patient eased, every subtle improvement noted, is a quiet victory. You feel the rhythm of your practice now as an extension of the seasons themselves. Spring taught renewal. Summer brings attention to subtle seasonal challenges, and winter reminded you of endurance and patience. Observation, care, and gentle intervention remain at the core of your work, woven together with intuition, humility, and quiet skill. Your practice is both ordinary and extraordinary, sustained by the steady cadence of human needs, seasonal changes, and attentive guidance. As the night grows deeper, you wind down slowly. Tools are cleaned, herbs stored, notes reviewed one final time. You take a deep breath, letting the day's weight settle. You feel the quiet satisfaction of work done carefully, responsibly, and thoughtfully. The long hours, subtle attentiveness, and gentle guidance have shaped not only your patient's well-being, but also your understanding of the delicate balance of health and life. Now you relax further, allowing the mind and body to soften. The familiar scents, tactile rhythms, and steady practice lull you into reflection. Healing, you realize, is as much about patience, observation, and reassurance as it is about herbs, poultices, or theory. You have guided bodies and minds toward balance, noted subtle changes, and adjusted with care. Each day adds to your understanding, each patient contributes to your learning, and each quiet victory strengthens your confidence. The evening light fades completely. You lean back, hands resting gently. listening to the distant sounds of the village and the faint whisper of the summer night. Your mind slows. The day's observations, the patient's small improvements, and the steady rhythm of your practice settle into a comfortable calm. Tomorrow will bring new patients, new challenges, and new lessons. But for now, you allow the sense of completion and quiet accomplishment to fill you. The long journey of practice, season after season, patient after patient, leads to this serene moment. The slow, persistent rhythm of care, the careful observation, and the gentle interventions create a quiet legacy, not written in scrolls, but felt in every eased cough, soothed child, and eased joint. You close your eyes, letting the scents, sounds, and sensations fade gently, and allow your mind to rest. This is the culmination of your work, a long meditation on balance, patience, and the quiet art of healing.
You are ready to leave the day behind. Slowly, the senses soften. The herbs, the sound of distant footsteps, the faint warmth of summer, all drift into memory as your body eases a day well spent. The steady rhythms of observation and care, and the quiet knowledge that your work, though often unseen, matters profoundly. The night stretches gently around you, soft and forgiving. You feel your breath lengthen, slowing naturally, matching the quiet rhythm of the village beyond your window. Each tool has been cleaned, each herb stored, and each note made carefully. The day is complete. Your mind drifts, recalling the small victories, the subtle easing of a cough, the gentle relief in a child's eyes, the faint improvement in a weary laborer's posture. These are your markers, your quiet accomplishments, carrying the weight of skill and patience without fanfare.
Outside, the sounds soften. Distant laughter fades, animals settle, and the breeze stirs leaves lazily. You feel the same calm that you have instilled in your patients, the comfort of routine, observation, and care. Your hands rest lightly, the faint scent of herbs lingering, grounding you. The subtle warmth of summer seeps into your bones, and you allow it to mingle with the gentle fatigue of a day's work. Healing, you remind yourself, is never dramatic. It is the slow accumulation of attention, patience, and gentle action. You have guided bodies toward balance, observed minute shifts, adjusted remedies, and reassured minds. Now, all that careful observation can rest alongside you. Your body softens, your senses drift, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a day completed with care. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the slow, comforting rhythm of evening settle around you. Breathe, release, and allow the calm you have cultivated throughout the day to flow gently into sleep. You have done enough. You have observed enough. You have cared enough. Let the night cradle you as it has cradled your patience, quietly, gently, with steady patience. Tomorrow will come, but tonight all is at peace. Sweet dreams.